Hello friends, my name is Anshul and you are watching our channel The Insight Coders, and this playlist about Spring Security where we are going to understand everything from basic to advanced and how JWT tokens are being used in Spring Security. So let's get started without wasting any of the time. So this playlist, the very first lecture of this playlist is the very basic stuff about what is Spring Security. How is the basic concepts that are like authentication, authorization, what does they mean? How Spring Security acts as a layer between the client and the server and intercepts every request that comes in between. So let's get started with the very first thing, that is what is Spring Security and how does it work. So this is the first slide, and here it shows that we have an application which can be any server, and here we need to create a security at the application level. That means who is being allowed to use our application or what kind of data you want to expose and to whom you want to expose. So for example, we have any application which is running and there is some user, a client who wants to access our application. So in respect to whatever request the person is asking for, we will be sending the response, correct? But the issue that comes here is that user a valid user to use our application or not, or he is some outsider who can steal some data or can make any threat to our specific application. So how do we check the security if the user is the right person to use our application or not? So here comes a role of Spring Security. Just imagine it as a security guard that we have in our societies. So what does a security guard do? For any request that comes in between, he intercepts that person and asks that person to show his ID card, and if the person is a valid user to enter into the society, then only he'll allow to do that. And similar to the security guard is what Spring Security acts as a layer just between the client and the server. So any request that comes from client goes to the Spring Security layer. If he feels like he's the right person, then only he'll forward the request to the server, and whatever response he'll be getting from the application, he'll be sending back to the client in the similar manner. So this is the basic implementation, the basic stuff that a Spring Security generally does. Now comes a point, we had a normal visualization, he's just like a security guard in the societies. But how exactly it happens in the IT world, in the applications? So you might have seen that many of the sites, they ask for you login through your username and password, correct? So that username and password is the ID card that I was referring to whenever a person wants to enter into a society. So this login username and password will tell if the user is a legit user to enter into our application and see whatever he wants to access for. Let's take a very basic example of a real world idea how exactly it works for. The very first scenario says we have a library management system of ABC College, and there is a person who is an outsider. He might be from XYZ College or any thief who wants to steal the data, or it can be any person who wants to access the library management system of ABC College. And since the person wants to access something, so it is not like we can directly give him the resource since he is not the legit user to use our application. So since the person can be anyone, we have denied the access for that specific person and he is not able to use our application. Let's take a second scenario now. So here we have a user who is the student of the same college, that was ABC College, and this student wants to view the books. So the request that the person is asking for is to view books, and you can see he is a user of the same college. That means he can definitely access the resources. So since he is a correct user, we have provided them the resources whatever he was asking for. So the first thing that you have seen is there was one user who was not a correct user and he was not allowed to use our system. And if any user with a correct login, username and password comes into the system, we'll get back the response to this specific thing. And this is the first concept that I was talking about, that is authentication. So authentication simply say who is the user. Is that user a correct user to enter into our stuff? If he is, then we'll simply give him the responses whatever he wants for. So how exactly it goes? Like our application, how is it going to identify that? As I mentioned, we'll be having some sort of login pages. The person has to fill his username and password. It can be different forms, like you can also go through SSO and other login methods. I'm just talking about the very basic stuff, how exactly authentication works. So there might be any form of authentication. Let's take a very basic example of a login page. He checks back into the database if he is the correct user with the correct username and password or not. If the username and password matches with the database, then we'll get back to the system that he is the right person, and the Spring Security will take the response to the client via the flow that we discussed in the previous slide. I hope everything is clear till this point. Let's go to the third scenario. The third scenario says, again we have a user who is a student of this specific college itself, and he wants to access something. But make a note, this time he is accessing something which is issue and return. And you might know that a librarian or any staff member of the librarian is allowed to issue, return something, but a student doesn't have the privileges to do that. Even though he is an authenticated user, but still he won't be getting the access to issue or return any of the book. He just have an access to view the books, to reserve the books, to do the basic stuff in the college library, but he is not allowed to issue or return the books. Otherwise, he can issue and return for any number of books for any number of people, correct? So that was not a correct privilege to be given to a student. Another example, so the fourth scenario says now we have some librarian or any of the staff member of that library, and he has all the access to issue return, to manage the books, to search a book, to do anything. So here the person is also authenticated and he also have the correct access to do that. So when we talk about access, that means the person has that much privileges to do something, that is known as authorization, which simply says what you can do or whatever privileges or access or rights do you have to access into the specific system. So this is always done once a user is being authenticated, he is the right user. That means we will see if he has the rules to do that or not. The very basic stuff which comes here is like what can be different level of permissions. Let's go through the same example. So one can be a student who can just have the privileges to view the books or reserve the book for the future if they want to issue them. Library staff, they can issue, return the books, they can view the books, they can manage the books into the shelves, they can go through any of the book, they can do anything. But there would be few things like deleting the logs or something, they won't be having the access to do that. So for here librarian comes into place who have all the permissions. And generally let me tell you what exactly happens. We have a different role for admin and all the permissions are being given to the admin, not exactly to the librarian. There might be some permissions which librarian doesn't have. So depending upon the complexity of the project, we have different roles with different privileges. So this is what authorization comes into place. Let's quickly go through what we have done in this specific video. So the very first thing was we just came to know that we have a different layer which comes in between the request and response, that was Spring Security. This layer provides us all the security stuff via authentication, authorization. Authentication says who you are and authorization says how many access or privileges you have to access any resource. Coming back to what exactly we are going to study in the upcoming videos. In the next videos, we are going to see how Spring Security authentication mechanism actually works, what is the architecture that Spring Security uses, and since this playlist would be majorly focused on JWT, so the point comes how JWT actually follows the Spring Security architecture, because I have personally seen when I was not actually clear about how the Spring Security architecture was working, I was never that much clear about how JWT was working. So to have all the concepts clear, you have to go through the basic stuff, how the Spring Security is being implemented. Next thing, like according to the situations, how the Spring Security behaves with default settings. And even though if you want to customize them or to configure them, then how you have to make those configuration and customizations. So everything will be taken up in this specific playlist. But the point comes is this framework is little bit tricky, not tricky actually, it is pretty straightforward, but the thing is it is not that much easy to understand at the first glance. So you have to be little bit patient here. And I promise I'll try to do all the justice with the course and try to have everything with the very basic examples and have all the hands-on practices so that it becomes clear to you at each and every step. Even though you feel like you are not able to understand any concept, please let me know in the comment box. I'll try to answer all your questions there. Well, this was all about this specific video. Let's go to the next video and understand the architecture in detail. Thanks a lot.